He built the empire, but when he walked into his own dealership undercover, he was treated like he didn't belong. What happened next left everyone speechless, and careers destroyed. David Carter stepped out of his car, pulling the hood of his jacket up as a cold breeze brushed against his face. The morning air smelled of fresh asphalt and car wax, a familiar scent from his years in the business. But today, he wasn't walking into his dealership as the CEO. Today, he was just another customer, at least, that's what everyone would think. He took a deep breath and pushed open the glass doors of the showroom. The place was spotless, exactly how he had designed it. Bright overhead lights reflected off the polished floors, casting a sleek glow on the rows of high-end vehicles lined up like trophies. Yet, as he stepped inside, something felt off. A group of salesmen stood near the coffee station, chatting in low voices. A sharp-dressed couple browsed the latest luxury models, while an eager salesman attended to them, flashing his brightest smile. David walked toward a black sports car in the center of the showroom, its glossy surface reflecting his image as he ran a hand along the hood. He waited. Any second now, a salesman should be approaching him. That was the standard. Seconds passed, then a minute. Nothing. He glanced toward the employees. One of them, a tall, middle-aged man with slicked-back hair and a gold watch, looked in his direction, then quickly turned away. Another, a younger man with an over-gelled haircut, walked right past him without so much as a nod. Instead, he made a beeline for a customer in a tailored suit, his voice suddenly full of energy. David clenched his jaw. Interesting. He turned slightly, catching bits of a hushed conversation from the front desk. "That guy?" One of the salesmen scoffed. "He looks like he just walked in off the street." "Yeah," another chuckled. "Probably just here to take pictures for his dream board." David's fingers curled into a fist for a brief second before he forced himself to relax. He had seen arrogance before, but this was his own dealership, his own employees. He had built this place with the promise that every customer, regardless of how they looked, would be treated with respect. Clearly, some people had forgotten that. He took a step toward the front desk. The two men, Greg, the older salesman, and Jake, the younger one, were still laughing quietly when they noticed him standing there. Their conversation died immediately, but neither of them spoke first. David let the silence stretch before speaking, his tone calm but firm. "I'm interested in that black sports car. Can I take it for a test drive?" Jake barely glanced at him before turning to Greg with an exasperated sigh. "You want to handle this?" Greg smirked. "Nah, not worth my time." His voice lowered, but David caught every word. Doubt he could even afford the down payment. David exhaled slowly, keeping his temper in check. He had heard enough, but he wasn't going to cause a scene. Not yet. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number. The salesman barely paid attention until a deep voice answered on the other end. "Hey, David, what's up?" It was Mark, the regional manager overseeing all of David's dealerships. David's eyes locked onto Greg as he spoke. "I'm at the downtown showroom, and I just had an interesting experience trying to buy a car." Greg's smirk faltered. Jake stiffened. Mark's voice sharpened. "You're at the dealership? Which one?" David leaned slightly forward, his voice dropping just enough for only the two salesmen to hear. "My dealership!" The color drained from Greg's face. Jake took an unconscious step back. David allowed the silence to linger for just a moment longer before he said, "And I've been completely dismissed by two of your employees." Jake swallowed hard. Greg's hands twitched at his sides. They had no idea who they had just insulted. Greg's smirk had vanished completely, replaced by a nervous stiffness in his posture. Jake, who had been so quick to dismiss David moments ago, suddenly looked like he wanted to disappear into the nearest showroom car. "Wait. What?" Greg stammered, his voice lacking its previous confidence. Who exactly are you talking to?" David didn't answer him just yet. Instead, he kept his phone to his ear as Mark's voice came through again, now fully alert. "You've been dismissed? By who?" David let the question hang in the air, watching Greg and Jake squirm under the weight of the silence. Then, without breaking eye contact, he finally said it. "Two of your salesmen, Greg and Jake." Jake's mouth parted slightly, his face turning a shade paler. Greg's fingers twitched, his eyes darting toward the other employees in the showroom as if hoping someone would step in and save him. "Wait a minute." Greg forced a chuckle, though it was thin and uneasy. "This is just a misunderstanding. David cut him off. "You should probably check your employee roster, Greg." His voice remained calm, but there was an edge of steel beneath it. "Because my name is David Carter." He paused for effect, letting the words settle. "CEO and founder of this company." Silence. The weight of the revelation hit like a thunderclap. Greg's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Jake took another step back, looking as if he had just been struck in the gut. Across the showroom, a few employees had taken notice of the unfolding scene, their quiet conversations dying as they turned to watch. Even some of the customers had picked up on the sudden tension. Mark, still on the phone, didn't hide his reaction. "You're kidding me," he muttered, followed by a sharp exhale. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. "No need," David replied coolly, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "I'm handling it." Greg swallowed hard. His bravado was gone, replaced by barely contained panic. "Mr. Carter, I didn't realize." David arched a brow. "No, you didn't. And that's the problem, isn't it?" The other employees in the showroom were fully watching now, their expressions ranging from shock to quiet amusement. Conversations had stopped, and a thick, uncomfortable silence filled the space. Even the wealthy couple who had been browsing cars moments ago had turned to see what was happening. Greg opened his mouth again, no doubt scrambling for an excuse, but before he could, another voice broke the silence. "Mr. Carter?" David turned. A young woman, dressed in a pressed navy suit, had stepped forward. Her name tag read Sarah. She looked nervous, but there was something steady about her demeanor. Unlike Greg and Jake, she didn't seem like she was about to collapse under the weight of the moment. "I was just wondering," she continued hesitantly, "would you still like to take the test drive?" David studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Finally," he said, his tone carrying just a trace of amusement. "Someone who understands customer service." Jake's face burned red, and Greg stood rigid, his hands balled into fists. "Yes," David continued, shifting his attention back to the black sports car he had admired earlier. "I'd love to take it for a spin," watching helplessly as the situation unraveled beyond their control. Their arrogance had cost them dearly, and they knew it. David settled into the plush leather seat of the sports car, running his fingers along the sleek steering wheel. The scent of new upholstery filled the cabin, a smell he had always associated with success, hard work, and dedication. But today, it was a reminder of something else. Negligence, arrogance, a culture within his own company that had been allowed to fester unchecked. Sarah stood attentively by the driver's side, her professionalism a stark contrast to the behavior he had just witnessed. "Take your time, Mr. Carter," she said with a polite nod. "Let me know if you have any questions." David met her eyes through the side mirror. She had no idea that she had just saved herself. Unlike Greg and Jake, she had treated him with respect, without assumptions, without dismissiveness. As he started the engine, he caught a glimpse of the two salesmen standing near the showroom entrance, whispering urgently to each other. Their postures were stiff, their faces a mix of confusion and fear. They were finally starting to put the pieces together. The test drive was smooth, the vehicle responding effortlessly as David navigated the city streets. But his mind wasn't on the car. His grip on the wheel tightened as he replayed their dismissive remarks in his head. How many customers had they treated this way? How many potential sales had they lost because of their arrogance? How many people had walked into his dealership ready to spend their hard-earned money only to be judged and dismissed? By the time he returned to the lot, he had made his decision. Sarah was waiting with a clipboard, her expression professional but eager. "So, what do you think?" she asked. David stepped out of the car, adjusting the cuffs of his blazer. "It's a solid drive," he said casually. Then he turned his gaze toward Greg and Jake, who were still watching from a distance. "I'll take it." Greg's head snapped up, Jake's face drained of color. You're buying it?" Greg asked, his voice cracking slightly. "That's right." David reached into his pocket for his phone. "And I think it's time we discuss some changes around here." At that moment, the glass door swung open, and Mark, the regional manager, strode inside. His expression was serious, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on David. Then, they flicked to Greg and Jake. David barely looked at him as he spoke. "We need to talk." Greg's shoulders slumped. Jake exhaled sharply, his confidence completely shattered. Mark nodded. Agreed. Greg swallowed hard, looking like he wanted to disappear. "Mr. Carter, please. We didn't mean..." David tilted his head slightly. "Didn't mean what?" His voice was calm, almost amused. "Didn't mean to judge me? Didn't mean to insult a customer you assumed wasn't worth your time?" Neither man had an answer. David let the silence stretch before turning back to Mark. "Effective immediately," he said, his voice steady. "They're both terminated." Jake's mouth fell open. "Wait, no warnings?" Greg's voice was desperate now. "Sir, please, I have a family." David's expression didn't change. "And how many families have you dismissed without a second thought? How many fathers or mothers came in here looking for a fair chance to buy a car, only to have you decide they weren't worth your time?" Neither man spoke. Security was called. As Greg and Jake gathered their belongings in stunned silence, Sarah stood to the side, her face a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. David turned to her. His expression softened slightly. "Sarah," he said. She straightened. "Yes, sir?" "You're one of the few people here who did the right thing today. I noticed that." She blinked, caught off guard. I was just doing my job, sir. And that's exactly why you're being promoted." Her eyes widened. "Wait, what?" "You heard me." David smiled. "You treated a customer with respect, without assumptions. That's exactly the kind of leadership I want in this company." Mark nodded. "I'll start the paperwork." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she covered her mouth, overwhelmed with shock. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. David gave her a firm nod before turning back to Mark. "I expect a full report on the hiring and training process here by next week. Things are changing." Mark swallowed hard. "Understood, sir." As David walked out of the dealership, his newly purchased car waiting at the curb, he took one last look at the showroom.